The distress signal came through at 0300 hours, cutting through the quiet hum of the deep space monitoring station like a knife. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison had been half asleep at his console, nursing his third coffee of the night shift, when every screen in front of him suddenly lit up with urgent red warnings. The message was desperate and clear. A civilization was dying, and they needed help. Now. Jake leaned forward, his tiredness vanishing as he listened to the translation software convert the alien language into English. The voice belonged to someone called Elder Kriath, leader of a Valari settlement in a distant star system. Their sun was collapsing ahead of schedule. Some kind of cosmic anomaly had triggered an early death, and they had maybe 2 weeks before the star would explode. Their evacuation ships had been destroyed in a recent meteor storm. 8,000 people were trapped on a dying world with no way to escape. Jake's hands moved quickly across his keyboard, pulling up star charts and calculating distances. The Kepler 186 system was far, but not impossibly far. He ran the numbers again, then reached for his phone. Captain Helen Brooks answered on the second ring, her voice alert despite the early hour. Jake explained the situation in quick, precise sentences. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Did they send this to the Galactic Council?" Helen asked. "Yes, ma'am. Sent it everywhere, actually. Council received it 6 hours ago." "And their response?" Jake pulled up the Council's official reply on his secondary screen. "Archived as economically unfeasible. They're not sending help." Another pause. Jake could almost hear Helen thinking through the implications. Earth was new to the galactic community. They'd only made first contact 3 years ago, and they still weren't official members of the Council. Getting involved in galactic affairs without permission could create political problems. "How far is it?" Helen asked. 3 weeks at maximum speed, ma'am. Maybe less if we push the engines. "And we have a ship that could make it?" "The Frontier. She's the only vessel we have with the range and cargo capacity." Helen made her decision quickly. "Get the crew together. I want us ready to launch in 12 hours. The Frontier sat in Earth's orbital dock like a sleeping giant. She wasn't elegant or particularly advanced by galactic standards, but she was solid and reliable, built for deep space exploration and cargo transport. The ship had enough room to potentially carry refugees if they could reach the Valari in time." Helen stood in the briefing room 6 hours later, looking at the faces of her assembled crew. She'd handpicked each of them for different reasons, and now she needed them to trust her judgment on something that might be seen as reckless by some. Lieutenant Chris Palmer, her pilot, sat with his arms crossed. He was young but talented, with instincts that couldn't be taught. Next to him was Maya Rodriguez, chief engineer, who could fix anything with enough time and spare parts. Dr. Ben Carter, their medical officer, looked concerned but attentive. Lisa Grant, communications specialist, was already taking notes. Helen explained the situation simply and honestly. A settlement needed help. The galaxy had turned its back. Humanity had a choice to make. "This isn't an official mission," she said clearly. "Command has given me discretionary authority, but this is volunteer only. If anyone wants off this assignment, speak now. No judgment, no consequences, nobody moved." Chris uncrossed his arms and leaned forward. "How fast do we need to go?" "Fast enough to get there in 3 weeks or less." Maya winced. "The Frontier's engines aren't rated for sustained maximum speed over that distance." "We'll be running hot the entire way. Can you keep her together?" "I can try." Ben raised his hand slightly. "Do we know anything about Valari physiology? Will our medical supplies even work on them?" "We'll learn on the way," Helen said. "Lisa will be researching everything available in the galactic databases during transit. We'll adapt as needed." Lisa looked up from her notes. "The Galactic Net has basic information on most species. I'll have preliminary reports ready within 48 hours of departure." Jake Morrison appeared on the wall screen via video link from the monitoring station. "Captain, I've been tracking Council communications. 3 other species have ships that could reach the Valari in time. None of them are going." Helen nodded slowly. She'd expected as much, but hearing it confirmed still made her angry. "What's their reasoning?" "Cost versus benefit. The Valari settlement is small. 8,000 individuals don't justify the resource expenditure in their calculations." Chris made a disgusted sound. "They're doing math on people's lives?" "That's how the Council operates," Jake said. "Everything is calculated. Risk, cost, benefit, strategic value. The Valari have nothing to offer in return, so they're considered a net loss." Helen looked around the room at her crew. That's the difference between them and us. We don't help people because of what they can give us in return. We help because it's right. The crew of the Frontier spent the next 12 hours in organized chaos. Supplies were loaded. Systems were checked and double-checked. Maya and her engineering team performed maintenance that was scheduled for next month, wanting the ship in peak condition before pushing her to the limits. Ben converted one of the cargo bays into a makeshift medical area, setting up extra beds and equipment. He didn't know how many wounded or sick Valari they might encounter, so he prepared for the worst. Lisa sat at her communication station, downloading every piece of information about the Valari that she could find. There wasn't much. They were an old species, peaceful and artistic. Their civilization had existed for thousands of years, but they'd never been militarily powerful or technologically aggressive. They'd focused on culture and philosophy instead of weapons and expansion. That choice had made them vulnerable when their homeworld was destroyed in someone else's war centuries ago. The settlement in Kepler 186 was all that remained. Chris ran flight simulations, plotting the fastest possible course. The route would take them through an uncharted nebula that most ships avoided due to navigation difficulties, but it would cut days off their journey, and days might make the difference between life and death. Helen made one final call to Earth Command, reporting their departure and estimated timeline. The response was cautiously supportive. Earth's leaders understood the political risks but also recognized the moral imperative. They gave Helen full authority to act as she saw fit. As the Frontier's engines powered up, Helen sat in the captain's chair and looked at her crew. They were ready. Maybe they wouldn't make it in time. Maybe the ship would break down halfway there. Maybe the Council would punish Earth for interfering. But they were going to try because someone had called for help and nobody else had answered. The Frontier pulled away from Earth's orbit, accelerating toward the darkness between stars. Behind them, a world watched and hoped. Ahead of them, 8,000 desperate people waited, not knowing that help was coming from the most unlikely source in the galaxy. Humanity had heard their plea, and humanity was responding. The first week in hyperspace was harder than anyone expected. The Frontier shook and rattled as Maya pushed the engines beyond their normal limits. Every few hours, alarms would sound from engineering, and Maya would rush to fix whatever had overheated or started failing. She worked with barely any sleep, surviving on coffee and determination. Chris sat in the pilot's chair for 16-hour shifts, his eyes locked on the navigation displays. The nebula they were crossing was beautiful but dangerous. Clouds of colorful gas obscured sensors and played tricks with their instruments. Twice they nearly collided with debris fields hidden in the cosmic fog. Chris's reflexes saved them both times, but the stress was showing on his face. Lisa spent her days buried in research. The Galactic database had information on the Valari, though much of it was old and incomplete. She learned that they were a smaller species than humans, standing about 5 feet tall on average. Their skin was translucent, showing the faint glow of their circulatory system beneath. When they experienced strong emotions, patterns of bioluminescence would ripple across their bodies like waves of colored light. The Valari had no military. They'd never developed weapons of war. Instead, they'd spent their centuries perfecting art forms that other species barely understood. Their sculptures were made from a special crystal that grew naturally on their world, and these creations could refract light in ways that seemed to defy physics. A single Valari sculpture could fill an entire room with moving rainbows that responded to sound and touch. But all that culture and beauty meant nothing if they couldn't survive. Lisa's research showed that the Valari homeworld had been destroyed 200 years ago, when it became collateral damage in a war between two powerful galactic empires. Neither empire had even bothered to evacuate the Valari before they started fighting over the planet's strategic location. Only a few thousand Valari had escaped on outdated ships, eventually settling in the remote Kepler 186 system, where they hoped they'd be forgotten and safe. Now even that refuge was being taken from them, not by war but by the random cruelty of the universe. On day 9 of the journey, Lisa finally managed to establish communication with the Valari settlement. The signal was weak and filled with static, but Elder Kriath's voice came through clearly enough. Helen sat in the captain's chair as Lisa patched the transmission to the main screen. The Elder's face appeared and Helen felt her breath catch. He looked tired and sad, his translucent skin showing dim blue patterns that Lisa's research said indicated grief and fear. But when he saw Helen, those patterns shifted to golden swirls of hope. "You came," he said simply, his voice carrying wonder and disbelief. "Someone actually came. We received your distress call," Helen replied. "We're 3 weeks out at our current speed. Can you hold on that long?" Kriath's face fell slightly. "Our scientists estimate we have perhaps 2 weeks before the star becomes unstable. After that, the radiation levels will be lethal even inside our shelters." Helen felt her stomach drop. They were already pushing the ship as hard as it could go. "We'll find a way to get there faster. Tell me about your people. How many need evacuation?" 8,217, Kriath said precisely. "Mostly families. Many children and elderly." Helen tried not to show her concern. The frontier could carry maybe 200 people comfortably. They could pack in more in an emergency, but 8,000 was impossible. Still, they'd figure something out. They had to. "We'll make it work," Helen promised. "Tell your people help is coming." After the transmission ended, Helen called a meeting with her senior crew. They gathered in the small conference room, all of them looking exhausted but determined. "We need to move faster," Helen said without preamble. "We've got less time than we thought." Maya shook her head immediately. "Captain, we're already at 110% of recommended speed. If I push the engines any harder, we risk a complete failure. And out here, a breakdown means we don't reach anyone. What if we cut non-essential systems?" Chris suggested. "Life support in the cargo bays, some of the lighting, anything we can spare?" "That might give us a few percentage points," Maya admitted. "But it won't cut days off our journey." Ben had been quiet, but now he spoke up. "Even if we get there in time, how do we evacuate 8,000 people?" "We don't have the capacity. We'll pack them in," Helen said firmly. "Every available space. We'll make it work." "Captain, that's not safe," Ben protested. "Life support is designed for our crew of 45. Even if we push it, maybe we could sustain 200 people for a short journey. 8,000 would overwhelm every system. We'd run out of oxygen, water, food. People would die." Helen knew he was right, but she also knew they couldn't leave anyone behind. "Then we'll have to find a closer safe point. Somewhere we can transfer them to other ships." Lisa pulled up a star chart. "There's Solaris Station, a human outpost about 3 days from the Volari system. If we could get them there, maybe other ships could meet us and take some of the refugees." "That's a big maybe," Chris said. "We'd need a lot of ships and fast." "Then we start calling for help now," Helen decided. She looked at Lisa. "Get me a line to Earth, to everyone. Military, civilian, commercial fleets. Tell them we need every ship that can fly." Back on Earth, Jake Morrison received Helen's message and immediately went to work. He started making calls, sending messages, pleading with anyone who would listen. The frontier was 3 weeks from reaching desperate refugees, and they needed backup waiting at Solaris Station. The response was slow at first. Ship captains were skeptical. Why should they divert their valuable time and resources for aliens nobody had ever met? But Jake was persistent, and gradually people started to listen. He told them about the Volari, about their peaceful culture and their tragic history. He explained how the galaxy had abandoned them, and how humanity had a chance to show what they stood for. One by one, ships began to commit. A cargo hauler changed course. A military transport volunteered. A colony ship that was between assignments offered to help. The trickle became a stream, and Jake started to believe they might actually pull this off. Meanwhile, on the frontier, the days blurred together. Maya practically lived in engineering, constantly adjusting, repairing, and coaxing the engines to keep running. She burned her hands twice on overheated conduits and refused to let Ben treat her until she'd finished the current crisis. Chris developed a tremor in his hands from gripping the controls for so many hours. The nebula seemed endless, and every day brought new navigation challenges. He stopped eating regular meals, surviving on protein bars he could eat without leaving his station. Ben prepared his medical bay for patients he'd never treated before. Lisa had provided him with basic Volari physiology data, and he studied it obsessively, trying to anticipate what medical problems they might face. The Volari had different blood chemistry than humans, but fortunately they breathed the same oxygen mix and could tolerate similar temperatures. Lisa kept the communication line to the Volari settlement open, talking with Kriath every day. She learned about their culture, their art, their philosophy. The elder told her about the Great Archive, a massive crystalline structure that contained their entire recorded history. 12,000 years of art, music, literature, and knowledge, all stored in crystal matrices that would be destroyed when the star died. When Lisa reported this to Helen, the captain made a difficult decision. "Can we save it?" "The archive is huge," Lisa said. "It would take up most of our cargo capacity, and we need that space for people." "People come first," Helen said firmly. Always, but Lisa had an idea. She contacted a Valari technician named Silara, who explained that the archive's crystal structure wasn't just storage, it was compressed data. With the right equipment, they could download the information into the Frontier's computer banks. It would take time and massive storage space, but it was theoretically possible. Helen approved the plan immediately. They couldn't save the Valari world, but maybe they could save the Valari soul. As they entered the third week, the Frontier emerged from the nebula. Ahead, still days away, was the Kepler 186 system. Behind them, the engines were screaming in protest but still running. And waiting at Solara Station, Jake Morrison reported, were 12 ships and counting. They were going to make it. Maybe. The Frontier dropped out of hyperspace into the Kepler 186 system, with 60 hours remaining until the star's predicted collapse. Chris had pushed the ship harder than anyone thought possible, cutting 3 days off their original estimate. But even that might not be enough. Helen stood on the bridge and stared at the main view screen. The Valari settlement was visible on the planet below, and even from orbit it was breathtaking. Crystalline structures caught the dying star's light and scattered it across the landscape in brilliant cascades of color. It looked like a city made of rainbows, beautiful and doomed. "Take us down," Helen ordered. "Landing site closest to the main settlement." The ship shuddered as they entered the atmosphere. Maya's voice came over the intercom, strained but steady. "Captain, the port stabilizer's acting up." "Landing might be rough. Do your best," Helen replied. She turned to Lisa. "Get Elder Krieth on the line. Tell him we're here." Chris guided the Frontier down through stormy skies. The planet's weather was already becoming unstable, as the star's radiation fluctuated wildly. Lightning crackled across red clouds and the ship rocked in turbulent winds. Chris's hands were steady despite his exhaustion, and he set them down with only a minor jolt. The landing ramp lowered, and Helen led an away team down to the surface. Ben and Lisa came with her, while Chris stayed at the controls and Maya remained in engineering. The air outside was thin but breathable and uncomfortably warm. According to sensors, the temperature had risen 15 degrees in the last week alone. Elder Krieth was waiting for them with several other Valari. Helen's first impression was how small and delicate they looked. The tallest of them barely reached her shoulder. Their translucent skin showed intricate networks of glowing veins, and their eyes were large and expressive. Krieth's bioluminescent patterns were swirling with multiple colors, showing a complex mix of emotions Helen couldn't begin to interpret. "You came," Krieth said, his voice filled with wonder. "We did not believe it possible." "We made a promise," Helen said simply. She looked around at the gathered Valari, seeing families clustered together, children holding tight to their parents' hands. "We need to start loading people immediately. We have 60 hours, maybe less." Krieth nodded, his patterns shifting to businesslike green and silver. "We are ready. Our people have been prepared since we first heard you were coming. They can board whenever you are ready to receive them." Ben stepped forward. "I need to examine some of your people first. Make sure our life support systems will work for you." "Of course," Krieth agreed. He gestured to several volunteers who came forward. Ben led them back to the ship, already running his medical scanner over them. Lisa looked at the crystalline city, remembering everything she'd learned about Valari culture. "The archive," she said to Krieth. "Can you take me to it?" The elder's patterns flickered with sad blue. "There is no point. We cannot take it with us. We might be able to download it," Lisa explained. "Save the information even if we can't save the structure." Hope returned to Krieth's colors. "Come, I will show you." The archive was the largest structure in the settlement, a massive crystal formation that rose like a cathedral. Inside, the walls glowed with stored data, millions of images and sounds preserved in crystalline matrices. Lisa felt overwhelmed just standing in it. This was the entire history of a civilization, 12,000 years of accumulated knowledge and beauty. Silara, the Valari technician, met them there. She was younger than Krieth, her patterns showing quick, nervous movements of purple and white. The archive can be interfaced with your technology, she explained. But downloading everything will take at least 40 hours, and it requires enormous data storage. Lisa did quick calculations in her head. 40 hours out of 60 didn't leave much margin for error, and the Frontier's storage capacity would be completely consumed. They'd have to delete almost everything currently in the ship's memory banks. But this was irreplaceable. We'll make it work, Lisa decided. She contacted the ship and explained what they needed to do. Maya's response was immediate. Lisa, if we wipe our data banks, we lose navigation maps, system diagnostics, everything. We'll be flying half blind. We can get that data again, Lisa argued. This can never be replaced. There was a pause, then Helen's voice came through. Do it. Save the archive. While Lisa and Solara worked on connecting the archive to the Frontier's computers, Helen and Ben dealt with the evacuation logistics. The numbers were even worse than they'd feared. The Frontier could theoretically hold about 400 people if they packed them in dangerously tight. 8,000 was impossible. Ben had examined the Volari volunteers and had good news, at least. Their physiology is compatible with our life support. They breathe the same air mix, tolerate similar temperatures, and their nutritional needs aren't too different from ours. The main issue is they're very sensitive to temperature changes. If we let it get too cold, they'll go into shock. So we keep it warm, Helen said. What else? They're more fragile than humans. Lower bone density, thinner skin. We'll need to be careful during transport that nobody gets crushed in the crowded conditions. Helen nodded, her mind already working through solutions. We'll organize them in groups, assign spaces carefully. Priority to children and elderly. Everyone else stands if they have to. Maya joined them, her face smudged with grease and exhaustion. Captain, I've been thinking. We can convert more spaces than we originally planned. The shuttle bay can hold people if we remove the shuttle. Some of the storage compartments can be emptied. The rec room, the gym, even the corridors. If we pack people in everywhere, and I mean everywhere, we might be able to fit 700. Still not enough, Helen said. No, Maya agreed. But it's more than we thought. Chris came down the ramp, stretching his back. He'd been at the controls for too long, and his body was paying the price. Captain, I've been in contact with Jake back on Earth. He says we've got 47 ships waiting at Solara Station. 47. If we can get the Volari there, we can distribute them across all those vessels. Helen felt a surge of emotion that she quickly suppressed. 47 ships. Humanity had mobilized in a way she'd never imagined possible. How far is Solara from here? 3 days at cruising speed. Maybe 2.5 if we really push. Our life support can handle 700 people for 3 days, Ben said slowly. It'll be tight, but it's possible. Helen's mind raced through the implications. They could take 700 Volari to Solara Station, then come back for more. Multiple trips. It would work. It had to work, but there was a problem. How long to get back here for a second trip? Chris winced. 3 days to Solara, 3 days back. That's 6 days minimum. We only have 60 hours until this star goes critical. The math was cruel and simple. They could make one trip, only one. They'd have to choose 700 Volari out of 8,000 to save. Helen felt something cold settle in her chest. This couldn't be the choice they'd come all this way to make. There had to be another way. What if we just packed them all in? Maya suggested quietly. Just load everyone regardless of capacity ratings. We'd suffocate, Ben said bluntly. The life support can't handle that many people. Carbon dioxide would build up faster than we could scrub it. We'd lose consciousness within hours and death wouldn't be far behind. Then we increase the scrubbing capacity, Maya insisted. With what? We don't have spare equipment. We can't manufacture it out of nothing. The argument was interrupted by Lisa's voice over the radio. Captain, you need to see this. Helen hurried to the archive where Lisa and Solara were surrounded by glowing displays. What is it? The archive download is working, but there's something else. Solara showed me the old Volari ships, the ones they escaped their homeworld on 200 years ago. They're still here in storage caverns. They're ancient and most don't work, but a few might still be functional. Helen's heart jumped. How many? Maybe 5 or 6. They're small, only hold about 100 people each, and they're slow. But if we could get them running, that would be another 500 or 600 people. Combined with the 700 on the Frontier, they could save over 1,000. It still wasn't everyone, but it was better than leaving 7,000 to die. Show me these ships, Helen ordered. The storage caverns were cut deep into the planet's rock. Inside, Helen found the old Valari vessels, ancient things that looked barely spaceworthy. But Maya examined them with an engineer's eye, and her assessment was cautiously optimistic. "These three might fly," she said, pointing. "They need work, a lot of work, but the core systems are intact. If we can get them powered up and running, they could make it to Solera Station." "How long?" 40 hours of constant work. Maybe more. Helen made the decision instantly. "Do it. Use whatever parts you need from the frontier if necessary. Get those ships flying." As Maya and her engineering team went to work on the old vessels, Helen walked back outside and looked up at the dying star. Its light was already different, tinged with orange and red that shouldn't be there. Time was running out and they still didn't have a way to save everyone, but they were going to save as many as they could. 30 hours remained, and the settlement had transformed into organized chaos. Maya and her engineering team worked around the clock in the storage caverns, trying to resurrect ships that had been dead for 2 centuries. The Valari had preserved them carefully, but time had taken its toll. Systems that should have been simple to restart were corroded or failed completely. Chris helped where he could, using his piloting knowledge to test control systems. 2 of the 3 ships they'd hoped to repair were complete losses. The power cores were too degraded to safely restart. But the 3rd ship, which the Valari called the Dawn's Memory, was responding. Slowly, painfully, but responding. "We can get her flying," Maya announced, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. "But she's fragile. 1 trip, that's all she can handle. After that, she'll need months of repair work." "1 trip to Solera Station?" Helen asked. "If we're lucky and nothing breaks, she can carry maybe 90 people safely. 100 if we push it." Helen did the math quickly. 700 on the frontier, 100 on Dawn's Memory. 800 total, out of 8,000. The numbers made her want to scream. Elder Krieth found her standing outside the archive, staring at the orange sky. The star was visibly different now, its surface roiling with violent storms. "You are troubled," he said quietly. "We can't save everyone," Helen admitted. "Even with the extra ship, we can only take 800 people." Krieth's patterns rippled with complex emotions. "You have traveled across the galaxy for people you have never met. You have risked your lives and your ship. 800 is 800 more than we had any right to hope for. It's not enough. It is 800 children who will grow up, 800 families who will stay together, 800 people who will remember our culture and pass it on." He placed a small, translucent hand on her arm. "You cannot save everyone, Captain. No one can, but you are saving who you can, and that is everything." The evacuation began with 20 hours remaining. The Valari had organized themselves with impressive efficiency. Families were grouped together, and each group knew exactly when and where to board. The children went first along with their parents, then the elderly and infirm. Everyone else would be chosen by lottery. Helen watched as Valari families walked up the frontier's ramp, each carrying a small bag of personal belongings. Many carried tiny crystal sculptures, the last pieces of their art they could take with them. The children were quiet, their bioluminescent patterns showing confused fear. They didn't fully understand what was happening, only that they were leaving home forever. Ben established a medical checkpoint, quickly examining each Valari before they boarded to make sure no one was too sick or injured to survive the journey. Most were healthy despite the stress, but several elderly Valari showed signs of radiation exposure from the increasingly unstable star. Lisa worked with Silara in the archive, watching the download progress creep slowly toward completion. 35%, 40%. Each percentage point represented centuries of accumulated knowledge. They couldn't afford to interrupt it now. The frontier filled up quickly. The cargo bays that Maya had converted into living spaces were soon packed with Valari. They stood shoulder to shoulder, sitting when they could, using every available square foot of floor space. The crew gave up their personal quarters, cramming 10 or 15 Valari into rooms designed for one person. Chris helped guide families to their assigned spaces, using his basic grasp of the Valari language that Lisa had taught him. The Valari thanked him in their musical voices, their patterns showing grateful gold despite their fear. With 15 hours remaining, they'd loaded 600 Valari onto the frontier. The Dawn's Memory was almost ready to fly, and another 100 Valari waited to board her. That left more than 7,000 still on the ground, knowing they'd been left behind by mathematics and physical limitations. Then disaster struck. The dying star erupted with a massive solar flare, a burst of radiation and energy that tore across the system. The Frontier's shields held, but the external docking clamp that connected the ship to the ground station was damaged. Alarms blared across the engineering deck. Maya ran diagnostics and cursed. The primary coupling is fried. We're stuck here unless we can repair it. How long? Helen demanded. 4 hours minimum. We'd need to do it in spacesuits because of the radiation levels outside. Chris was already grabbing his suit from the locker. Then we better get started. Maya and Chris suited up and went outside into a nightmare. The sky was dark red now, and radiation counters clicked urgently on their wrist displays. They worked fast, replacing the damaged coupling with spare parts Maya had grabbed from storage. The work was delicate, requiring precision while wearing bulky gloves. Halfway through the repair, Chris's suit started beeping. Radiation warning. His exposure was approaching dangerous levels. I'm fine, he said when Maya told him to go back inside. Just need a few more minutes. But a few more minutes turned into 20, then 30. The coupling was more damaged than they'd thought. By the time they finished, Chris's radiation badge had turned dark red. He'd been exposed to levels that would make him sick, possibly kill him without treatment. Ben was waiting in the airlock when they returned. He took one look at Chris's badge and his face went pale. You need immediate treatment. Later, Chris said, pulling off his helmet. We need to launch in the next few hours. Chris, this is serious. Without treatment, you could develop acute radiation sickness. Then treat me after we're in space. We don't have time now. Ben wanted to argue, but he knew Chris was right. He helped Chris to the medical bay and started him on anti-radiation medication, but the real treatment would have to wait. With 10 hours remaining, the Dawn's memory powered up successfully. Her engines were weak and her systems were barely functional, but she could fly. 100 Valari boarded her, families chosen by lottery holding their children close. A young Valari pilot named Kesh volunteered to fly the ship, with Chris providing remote guidance from the Frontier. The loading continued on the Frontier. 700 Valari were now aboard, packed into every available space. The corridors were full of people standing shoulder to shoulder. The environmental systems were struggling to keep up with the demand. Carbon dioxide levels were rising despite the scrubbers running at maximum capacity. Maya made a desperate call. Captain, we're over capacity. We can't take more people without risking everyone. Helen stood at the top of the ramp, looking at the thousands of Valari still waiting below. Families, children, elderly, all of them knowing they'd been left behind. We have to take more. Captain, please. We're already beyond safe limits. Then we go beyond unsafe limits. Helen's voice was hard. We pack them in until there's literally no room left. We'll deal with the consequences. Elder Kreath approached her. Behind him stood nearly 200 other Valari, all elderly, all showing the silver-gray patterns that indicated they'd made peace with their fate. These are our elders, Kreath said, including myself. We give our places to the young. Take them instead of us. No, Helen said immediately. You're coming too. Captain Brooks, you do not have room for everyone. We understand this. Better that we who have lived full lives should remain, so that those with lives ahead of them can escape. Helen wanted to argue, wanted to refuse, but the truth was inescapable. They couldn't save everyone, and these elders were offering their lives to save others. She felt tears burning in her eyes. Your sacrifice will be remembered, she said softly. Your people will know what you did. We know, Kreath replied. His patterns showed peaceful acceptance. Go now. Time is short. The final loading was heartbreaking. Another 100 young Valari boarded, children who had to leave their grandparents behind. Helen watched families torn apart by necessity, watched children crying as they walked up the ramp while their elders stayed below, their patterns showing false cheerfulness to comfort the young. When the Frontier's ramp finally closed, 900 Valari were aboard. Combined with the 100 on Dawn's memory, they were saving 1,000 people. 1,000 out of 8,000. The other 7,000 would die when the star exploded. Helen went to the bridge, her heart heavy. Chris was at the controls despite his radiation sickness, his face pale but determined. Ready to launch when you are, Captain. Status of the archive download? Helen asked Lisa. 98% complete. 2 more minutes. Helen watched the progress bar crawl toward 100%. Below them, 7,000 Velari stood in the settlement square, their patterns showing brave acceptance. They raised their hands in a gesture that Lisa had told her meant farewell and blessing. The download completed. "We have it," Lisa reported. The entire archive. 12,000 years of Velari history. "Get us out of here," Helen ordered. The Frontier's engines roared to life. The ship lifted slowly, struggling under the excessive weight. Maya coaxed every bit of power from the straining systems. Beside them, Dawn's memory rose on failing thrusters, Kesh's piloting skill keeping the ancient ship stable. As they climbed through the atmosphere, Helen looked at the view screen one last time. The crystalline city glowed below, still beautiful even as it was dying, and in the settlement square, 7,000 Velari stood. The journey to Solara Station was 3 days of controlled crisis. Every system on the frontier was pushed beyond its breaking point. The ship hadn't been designed to carry 900 people, and it protested constantly. Alarms sounded every few hours as something else failed or overheated, or started giving warnings that couldn't be ignored. Maya lived in engineering, sleeping in 15-minute intervals when exhaustion forced her to. She held failing power conduits together with her insulated gloves, rerouted systems that were never meant to be rerouted, and performed miracles with spare parts and determination. Her hands were burned and blistered, but she refused treatment from Ben until more urgent cases were handled first. The life support system struggled most of all. Carbon dioxide levels climbed steadily despite the scrubbers running at maximum capacity. Ben had to reduce the oxygen mixture slightly to compensate, leaving everyone feeling tired and short of breath. Headaches became universal among crew and refugees alike. The Velari bore it all with remarkable patience. They stood packed together in the cargo bays and corridors, sitting when they could, sharing the limited space with careful consideration for each other. The children were quiet, their bioluminescent patterns dimmed from stress and the thin air. Parents held them close, singing soft songs in their musical language that Lisa's translator couldn't quite capture. Chris remained at the pilot station, despite his worsening radiation sickness. Ben had started aggressive treatment, but Chris was deteriorating faster than the medicine could help. His hands shook on the controls and he'd started vomiting every few hours. But when Ben tried to relieve him, Chris refused. "No one else can navigate like I can," Chris said stubbornly. "We're overweight and underpowered. One mistake and we drift off course or hit something. I'll rest when we dock." Ben wanted to argue, wanted to physically drag Chris to the medical bay, but he knew Chris was right. The pilot's skill was keeping them alive and on course, so Ben stayed on the bridge ready to help if Chris collapsed. Lisa spent her time with the Velari, learning about their culture and trying to keep spirits up. She taught the children simple Earth songs, and they taught her Velari melodies in return. The music helped, giving everyone something to focus on besides the fear and discomfort. She also began cataloging the archive data they'd saved. 12,000 years of history was overwhelming, but Lisa wanted to understand what they'd preserved. She found poems written 3,000 years ago that moved her to tears despite the imperfect translation. She discovered scientific theories that Earth's physicists would spend years analyzing. She saw artwork that redefined her understanding of color and light. The Velari who could reach her station would crowd around, looking at images of their lost homeworld, their destroyed history. They would point and tell stories, explaining things that weren't in the database. Lisa recorded everything, adding their oral history to the digital record. On day 2, disaster struck the Dawn's memory. The ancient ship's engines finally gave out, leaving her drifting in space. Kesh, the young Velari pilot, managed to send a distress call before communications failed. Chris immediately altered course to intercept despite the risk. The frontier was already struggling, and any deviation could push their systems into complete failure. But there were 100 Velari on that dying ship, and leaving them wasn't an option. When they reached the Dawn's memory, the situation was worse than feared. Life support had failed along with the engines. The temperature inside was dropping rapidly, and the Velari were going into shock from the cold. Ben estimated they had maybe 2 hours before people started dying from hypothermia. There was no time for a careful docking. Chris brought the Frontier alongside, and Maya led a team outside in spacesuits to manually connect the airlocks. They worked frantically, knowing that every minute delay meant more Velari sliding toward death. When the connection was made, They opened both airlocks and began evacuating the Dawn's memory. The Volari who could still move helped those who couldn't, carrying children and elderly through the temporary passage. Ben met them on the frontier side, wrapping them in emergency thermal blankets and treating the worst cases of hypothermia. The rescue took 90 minutes. When the last Volari was aboard, they sealed the airlock and left the Dawn's memory drifting. The ancient ship had made its final voyage, surviving just long enough to get its passengers within reach of help. But now the Frontier had 1,000 people aboard instead of 900. The life support system, already strained to its limits, started failing. Carbon dioxide levels jumped to dangerous concentrations. People began losing consciousness from oxygen deprivation. Maya made an emergency decision. She vented atmosphere from the uninhabited sections of the ship, reducing the total volume of air they needed to maintain. It helped, but not enough. The ship simply wasn't designed for this. Helen stood on the bridge and watched the environmental readouts climb toward lethal levels. In 6 hours, maybe less, the carbon dioxide concentration would reach the point where people would start dying. They were still a day from Solaris Station. Ideas? She asked her crew. Maya shook her head. We've done everything possible. There's nothing left to cut, nothing left to optimize. We're just carrying too many people. Ben looked haunted. We could put people in medically induced comas. That would reduce their oxygen consumption, but we'd need to choose who to put under, and I don't have enough medication for everyone. No, Helen said firmly. We're not playing that game. We saved these people. We're not choosing which ones get to breathe. Lisa had been quiet, but now she spoke up. What if we asked for help? We're not the only humans out here. We're in the middle of nowhere, Chris said, his voice weak. No one is close enough to reach us in time. Then we call ahead to Solaris Station, Lisa insisted. Get them to send ships out to meet us. Cut the distance. Helen seized on the idea immediately. Lisa, contact Jake. Tell him we need ships launching now, fastest vessels available. They meet us halfway and we start transferring refugees. Lisa got on the communications array and sent the message. On Earth, Jake received it and immediately started making calls. He'd already organized the fleet waiting at Solaris Station. But now he needed something more, something faster. The response came from unexpected sources. A military courier ship, designed for speed over capacity, volunteered to make the run. A racing yacht whose owner had been following the news changed course. A mining company sent their fastest shuttle. None of them could carry many people, but they could reach the Frontier in 10 hours instead of 24. The Frontier limped forward through space, her engines groaning, her systems failing one by one. Maya performed repairs that shouldn't have been possible, keeping critical systems online through pure stubbornness. Chris guided them forward despite barely being able to see straight from his radiation sickness. On hour 8, the first rescue ship appeared on sensors. The military courier matched velocity and docked carefully. They could only take 20 people, but 20 was 20 fewer, straining the Frontier's life support. More ships arrived over the next few hours. The racing yacht took 15. The mining shuttle took 30 by packing them in like the Frontier had. Each transfer gave the Frontier's systems a little more breathing room, brought the environmental readings down a few precious points. By the time they reached Solaris Station, the Frontier had transferred 200 refugees to other ships. The remaining 800 were exhausted, sick, and traumatized, but alive. Jake had organized the reception perfectly. Medical teams waited to treat the most seriously ill. Temporary housing had been prepared. Food, water, and supplies were ready. And most importantly, the fleet of 47 ships was ready to take the Volari and distribute them across human space. Helen walked down the ramp on shaky legs, barely believing they'd made it. The station's commander, an older woman named Patricia Lang, met her with a salute and a smile. Hell of a rescue mission, Captain. Hell of a support operation, Commander, Helen replied. Couldn't have done it without all those ships you gathered. Those ships gathered themselves, Patricia said. We put out the call and they came. Cargo haulers, colony ships, military transports, even some private yachts. Humanity doesn't need much convincing to help people in trouble. Over the next few hours, the Volari were distributed across the waiting fleet. Families stayed together when possible, and each ship made room for as many as they could safely carry. The Volari thanked everyone they met, their bioluminescent patterns showing profound gratitude. Chris finally allowed Ben to put him in the medical bay for serious treatment. The radiation exposure was severe, but Ben was confident he'd recover fully with time and proper care. Maya collapsed from exhaustion and slept for 16 hours straight. Lisa continued working with the Volari, helping them communicate with their new human hosts. 3 days after arriving at Solara Station, official contact came from the Galactic Council. A formal transmission demanded Helen's presence for a hearing. She was being charged with violating non-interference protocols and acting without council authorization. Helen stood in the station's communication center and faced the council, representatives on the screen. They were a collection of different species, all looking stern and disapproving. The lead representative, an insectoid called Vexnor, spoke II,